So back to the topic. Spiritual writings during the 14th century addressed the issue about becoming closer to God. One of the first spiritual writers during the time was Richard Rolle, and his more famous work is Ego Dormio, a combination of prose and verse about the love towards God and the approaches deemed as ideal as God's lover. There was also Walter Hilton with The Scale of Perfection as one of his works. It is a book about spiritual exercises to achieve peace. Another prominent spiritual writer was Julian of Norwich. Her writing, titled Revelations of Divine Love, contains the visions or revelations she had during the time when she was struck with a life-threatening illness involving Mary and God himself providing her with various guidance and saving her from Satan. Her published work marks the first book written in English by a woman to be published, cementing her place as one of the most influential female writers. It can be inferred that the reason on why there were the increasing amount of spiritual writings during the time was due to the Black Death. The Black Death was one of the most devastating pandemics to ever hit humanity, wiping out hundreds of millions of Europe's populations and even spread to the Middle Eastern nations. It lasted from 1346 to 1353. And to avoid getting too technical, think of it as Ebola, but worse, due to the lack of medicinal progress at the time. The plague caused death to be closer to people's hearts, possibly resulting in them seeking for salvation and spiritual peace, making there more and more spiritual writings during the time. Now, the 14th century was the period when one of the most dominant and influential writers of all time created an equally influential work. Geoffrey Chaucer, a courtier, wrote the Canterbury Tales. The Canterbury Tales is his last work and by far his most renowned one. The Canterbury Tales is a story about a storytelling contest, so there are numerous stories contained within a storyception. Well, jokes aside, basically it is a tale about the pilgrims, or the ones journeying from one place to another, often for religious reasons, and their telling of their stories throughout their way to Canterbury. The work includes characters from various social standings and occupations, such as the knight, the squire, the miller, the shipman, the merchant, the physician, the parson, the monk, the summoner, the pardoner, the clerk of Oxford, and several more others. Point is, there are numerous characters and each tells his or her own stories. And just like the amount of characters, the work itself has numerous reasons on why it is one of the most influential literary works of all time. Starting from a general premise, Chaucer's telling of the story is often described as being able to capture the human spirit and inherent nature, thus enabling people from various walks of life to think about the other social positions or even human nature as a whole due to the rich characters and depth. In order to avoid getting too subjective, let's address the technical issue here. The Canterbury Tales was one of the first forms of writing to include a collection of a vast amount of stories into one package. So to put it simply, it was one of the earliest short story collections. Moreover, he also introduced several compounds and used the 5-stressed line in poetries, which paved the way for iambic pentameter in poetries utilized by William Shakespeare and other poets. Chaucer's heroic couplets have become so renowned that it is possibly one of the reasons on why the traditional forms of poetry is so famous. Moreover, again, Chaucer's work induced the vernacular language, or English in this case, as a language able to be utilized in a complex manner. Due to the Norman conquest, English was viewed as an inferior language compared to French, being commented by some as not being able to deliver the same level of beauty, and Chaucer proved them wrong. Chaucer's being one of the earliest writers to utilize a certain neat format of poetry earned him the title the Father of Poetry, influencing a number of future writers. Of course, being his last work, the Canterbury Tales was not Chaucer's only work. There was also Troilus and Cresside, a story which was one of Shakespeare's main references in his play, Troilus and Cressida. And other than those two, there were several more of Chaucer's works which can be looked up to. And the greatness did not stop there. There was another writer, John Gower, who was one of Chaucer's contemporaries. His work, Confessio Amantis, or The Lover's Confession, was one of William Shakespeare's major influences in his play, which is Pericles. Sadly, we do not have the time to actually discuss about every single major writer in this period in detail, so let's move on after a few seconds of break.
Created using Powtoon.